Live from London, this is BBC News. Joe Biden faces calls to reconsider running for the White House after a stumbling performance in the first US election debate with Donald Trump.
With dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
We'll be live with the latest on that, our main story. Meanwhile, in the general election campaign here, a Reform UK worker is caught on camera making racist remarks about Rishi Sunak.
I've always been a Tory voter. What annoys me is he got in. What's good is he?
Nigel Farage distanced himself from those comments. The Prime Minister leads the condemnation.
It makes me angry, and I think he has some questions to answer. And I don't repeat those words lightly. I do so deliberately because this is too important not to call out clearly for what it is.
And I'm Regina Vaidyanathan in Ashford in Kent. Looking at the healthcare system in England, the NHS is consistently one of the most important issues for voters. I've been speaking to doctors, patients and healthcare experts about the challenges and how to fix them.
One other headline, Glastonbury gets into full swing with the first of its two female headlines, Dua Lipa, set for the Pyramid stage later this evening. Hello and welcome to BBC News. Joe Biden is under pressure to reconsider his candidacy for the US presidential election after a debate performance against Donald Trump, which has been described as disastrous. In the first televised debate of the campaign, President Biden struggled to finish sentences and appeared rambling and at times incoherent. The appearance had been meant to reassure voters that his age wasn't an issue in the campaign, but instead it underlined concerns and provoked what many are calling panic in the Democratic Party. Well, let's go live to our North America correspondent John Sudworth, who's there in Atlanta for us. And John, in terms of the New York Times, one headline they were running was "It's a stumbling performance and a party in panic."
Yes, well, this was a debate that the Democrats called for, and Joe Biden really had one job, which was to allay those long smouldering concerns about his age and mental competence. In the end, he has only amplified them. In many ways, it wasn't a great performance from Donald Trump, also sometimes rambling in a speech festooned with falsehoods. But in comparison, Joe Biden has made Mr. Trump look measured and presidential, and it has pushed those concerns and those questions about Mr. Biden's candidacy right out into the wide open. My colleague Gary O'Donoghue looks at what was universally considered a terrible night for Mr. Biden.
For the first time in debate history, a former president arriving to debate a current president. That current president aiming to be the oldest incumbent of the White House in US history.
It's Joe Biden.
4 years ago, when these two men met, it ended up in a slanging match.
Donald Trump.
But even new rules didn't stop the insults from flying.
But the only reason I'm here is he's so bad as a president that I'm going to make America great again.
My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
Both men accused the other of trashing the economy, clashing over tax cuts and inflation.
He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began, since Herbert Hoover.
The only jobs he created are for illegal immigrants and bounce-back jobs, a bounce-back from the COVID.
Sure that we continue to
At times, Joe Biden sounded hoarse and difficult to understand. His aides said he had a cold, but there have been persistent concerns about his concentration and stamina, and this did not dispel those worries.
With dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden.
Abortion and immigration were hotly contested, with Donald Trump delivering perhaps his strongest line of the night.
We are living right now in a rat's nest They're killing our people in New York, in California, in every state in the union, because we don't have borders anymore. Every state is now a border.
When both men were asked about their age, Joe Biden is 81, Donald Trump 78, they ended up in a bizarre argument about golf.
I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie, that he's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
There was little in this debate to change the minds of the committed. Both men made well-worn attacks on one another. Both men hurled well-worn insults at one another. What will really count is how this lands with the small number of undecided voters in those key swing states that will decide November's election. Gary O'Donoghue at the presidential debate in Atlanta for BBC News.
Well, the White House has been rallying around President Biden. Vice President Kamala Harris going on the US networks after this debate to suggest that really for the US people, the thing that matters is the record over the rhetoric, the style over the substance. But of course, being US president is more than just about record. It is about communication. And those questions about his candidacy in the future are really now out in the open. Just to give you a little bit of a flavour of that, a former senior advisor to President Obama, David Plouffe, immediately after the debate went on the network saying this is a DEFCON moment for the Democrats. And Andrew Young, a former Democrats presidential candidate himself, went on social media saying, guys, it's time to nominate someone else.
Sudworth there in Atlanta, thanks very much. Well, let's get more of a flavour. This was how the US has been waking up this morning and reacting to that debate. Have a look at this.
President Biden faces backlash from inside his own party after a very shaky debate performance.
Some House Democrats talking to the White House about having him step down.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Well, they're just a flavour of some of the coverage. Let's talk now to Rick Molson, the political strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Rick, welcome here to BBC News. You were watching every minute of that debate. When did you first realise it was going horribly wrong for Joe Biden?
Joe Biden had a bad night last night. There is no doubt about it. It was evident pretty early in the process that he was not on his A game. But I did note two things that I think, I'm not a panicker by nature, and so I'm not panicking right now. I did note two things in the course of this debate. One is that Donald Trump was offering nothing new beyond what appeals to his base already, this gigantic mosaic of lies and bizarre assertions and tearing down America. Joe Biden improved toward the back end of the debate, but no one's going to spin it that Joe Biden had a great night last night. It's not something that, as an honest person, I'm going to go out and say, wow, that was an A+ performance, Mr. President. I would have sat in the room and told him that, you can't do it that way.
I'll come back to that spin point in a moment or two, but you said you're not panicking. You will know there are many, many Democrats and some senior Democrats that are panicking.
See, that's my superpower. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an ex-Republican. And I don't approach this race simply as Biden versus Trump. My mission and the Lincoln Project's mission since 2020, when the Lincoln Project was formed, and mine since 2015, when I opposed him for the first time, is to defeat Donald Trump and Trumpism. I understand who he is, and nothing about last night changed that Donald Trump is a felon, a fraud, a liar, a sexual abuser, a criminal, and a man who is in the pocket of Vladimir Putin and foreign interests. This is not a guy who in any way changed his character or destiny last night. Joe Biden had a bad night, but Donald Trump did not get a transformative moment out of this. Triumphalism in politics is a very bad drug to take. And we are very early in the campaign, so we've got 130 days to go. Bill Clinton blew his first debate with George H.W. Bush, my old boss. Barack Obama blew his first debate with John McCain. George W. Bush blew his first debate with Al Gore. I was standing there in the sidelines and watching him just go down in flames. A bad debate, and in this situation, is worse for Joe Biden than for those people. I will grant you that. But this idea that you have to panic and run around and day trade in politics and chase the dragon of let's get somebody new, The fight has to be focused on who Trump is and what he will do to this country. And that's why at the Lincoln Project, we're still focused on how do you beat Trump.
Sure.
And Biden is a candidate who's going to have his campaign. They're going to make their decisions. I can't decide those things for him.
Sure.
But we can decide.
I suppose the difficulty here is, despite that long list of the things you said about Donald Trump, whether so much of that gets drowned out. It was a concern, this age concern about Joe Biden, even before this debate. This debate was to dispel all of that. And we were talking there about what the Vice President has been saying from the White House, in effect saying, let's concentrate on the record. It is a very difficult strategy, isn't it, to try to convince people they didn't see what they actually saw.
I don't think anybody's trying to do that in any real case. I believe that Joe Biden had a terrible night last night, a terrible night, an F- night. It was a bad night. That doesn't change who Trump is. This election needs to be a referendum on Donald Trump. That's the strategic approach that we're taking and that we believe will be the only outcome that will be successful here. Joe Biden has had very good nights that everybody's forgetting about right now.
Yep.
State of the Union 2 times. White House Correspondents, the speeches at Normandy. He has had a lot of great speeches, presentations, and moments. If he had an off night last night, yes, it was very consequential. But the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump is out talking about sharks and boat batteries and washing machines half the time when he's on this stuff, and it doesn't even sound like he's speaking English.
I get all of that, but let me ask you a different question, because I know that your project is all about trying to ensure that Donald Trump doesn't get back to the White House. But, and here's the but, does it not make more strategic sense for the Democrats? I know you're not a Democrat. What is the problem with changing candidate now?
Everything.
Is it too late in the timeline?
I think it's probably too late, but again, it's not my decision. I'm not in the Democratic Party. I'm not in the Democratic apparatus. The only person who would decide to leave this race and who could do this is Joe Biden himself. And if Joe Biden says, for the good of the country, I will leave this race, then we're going to see how it plays out. There will be a very difficult process. We've never had to have this sort of process this late in the game in the U.S. And I do think that there are a number of Democratic candidates out there, but I'm not going to speculate on who they are or what they would do, because most of them have already said they're sticking with Joe Biden for now. And look, 130 days in Trump time is like a decade in normal political time. He will do things that will blow himself up. He will screw up. He will say the most bizarre things. And just as he did in 2020, groups like ours will find ways to make the race a referendum of America or Trump. This is really a race where Trump is running against the American system, where Trump is running against American values, against the Constitution, against the Republic. This is a guy who represents such an existential danger to the future of America and the world that we've got to work around whatever problem Joe Biden had on the night of June 27th and figure out how to beat Trump regardless.
But that's extraordinary, because you had a candidate last night that couldn't shine a light on all of those incredibly serious things that you've talked about. You're now talking about workarounds of your own US president. Let me ask you a final thought, because 9 months ago, Ted Cruz, the Republican, said a really interesting thing in terms on a podcast. He said, and he predicted, it would be a nightmare scenario for the Republicans if we got to a point where Joe Biden was considered too old. The Obamas, who do have sway with him, take him aside and convince him of that and replace him with a candidate that could beat Trump. Is there something in that the Obamas do have the sway to say to Joe Biden, hey, look, it's time to think again, and perhaps there is a better other candidate out there?
Well, I can't speak to their personal relationship, and I know they've remained close, but I can't speak to what the Obama's counsel would be to the president. If it shifts to another candidate, we will end up in a situation, just as the framing I told you a moment ago will be. It will be a choice of a referendum on Trump, America or Trump. Whatever the candidate would, you could pick almost anyone in the country and still run the America or Trump campaign against Donald Trump, because his behavior, his record, his criminality, it's so pernicious that the panic of one night should not dominate the idea that Trump can be beaten, because Trump can still be beaten. And triumphalism in politics, as I said, is a very, very bad drug to take.
Rick Wilson, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us live
Thank
here
you so much for
on
having
BBC
me.
News. Thank you.
Anytime.
Now, let's turn to the general election campaign here, because the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has condemned a racist term used about him by a Reform UK campaigner, saying it hurts and it makes me angry. It follows comments caught on camera by a team from Channel 4 News in which the campaigner used a racist term to describe Mr Sunak and suggests that migrants crossing the channel should be used for target practice. Well, that party worker has since said his comments were personal and not representative of the party. The Reform UK leader, Nigel Farage, has distanced himself from those remarks. Our political correspondent, Ian Watson, has the story, and we should warn you his report does contain language which some people will find offensive.
Reform UK under scrutiny from an undercover reporter. This campaigner in Clacton used a racist term to describe the Prime Minister and had some views on what the army should do to illegal immigrants.
You get the young recruits there, yeah, with guns on the beach, target practice, just show them.
The campaigner, Andrew Parker, said he hadn't told Nigel Farage about his views and apologised if he brought the party into disrepute. But hang on, Channel 4 also heard the views of another campaigner, this time on gay people and the rainbow flag.
Did you see that degenerate flag on the front bonnet? What the old Bill doing promoting that crap? He's about catching nonsense, not promoting the
Now, it should be stressed that these are campaigners, not candidates. They're self-selecting volunteers, although the second one you heard from is well known to Nigel Farage. He has, of course, had problems with actual candidates too, but blames that on the vetting company employed for not doing their job. But other party leaders say that Nigel Farage himself should take responsibility for those who support him.
When my two daughters have to see and hear Reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing it hurts and it makes me angry, and I think he has some questions to answer. And I don't repeat those words lightly. I do so deliberately because this is too important not to call out clearly for what it is.
You have to ask the question why so many people who are supporting reform seem to be exposed in this particular way. It's for a leader to change his or her party, to make sure the culture is right and the standards are understood by everybody within the party.
Nigel Farage says that those campaigners in Clacton are no longer on his campaign.
Perhaps one of the reasons the odd person like this gravitates towards us is because, ironically, the BNP don't exist anymore. When we find out who they are, we get rid of them. End of.
Nigel Farage tends to subscribe to the adage, there's no such thing as bad publicity. But in this campaign, that theory is being tested almost to destruction. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Good morning.
Ian Watson with that report. You can see a full list of all of the candidates standing in the Clacton constituency. It is also on the BBC News website and also the BBC News app. Well, the leader of Reform, Nigel Farage, has since claimed that Channel 4 used an actor in their programme. The broadcaster has denied that, saying, "We met Mr Parker for the first time at Reform UK party headquarters, where he was a Reform Party canvasser." So, with less than a week to go before the election, where do we stand with the polls? Well, this is the latest BBC poll tracker, and you can see Labour retains its substantial 20-point lead over the Conservatives. Reform UK are third on 16%, with the Liberal Democrats on 12%. Well, Ipsos is a market research company who spent the election recording political trends and conducting opinion polls. Let's speak to Holly Day, their research manager. Holly, welcome here to the programme. I was talking to one of your colleagues at Ipsos only a couple of days ago. They were reporting one of your polls then, saying the Tories were down 4, Reform up 6. Where are we now, a few days on?
That's exactly where we still are. I think the headline for the campaign as a whole has been that top level margin hasn't changed. Labour consistently having a 20 points or thereabout lead, 23 points in our recent poll, as you said. I think the interesting thing has been the movement beneath the surface for some of those smaller parties. And given the news you've just been reporting on prior to this piece, we actually have Reform UK up on 15%, which is the highest that we have polled on them. This obviously occurred last week, so it was before these events have happened, so remains to be seen the impact of recent events. But the Liberal Democrats are also up in 11% and the Greens on 7%, so smaller parties gaining where the bigger parties are losing out, but that margin at the top level between the two main parties has remained consistent throughout the campaign.
So that's interesting. I hear what you say about your recent polling not taking on board all of the furore that has surrounded Reform UK and that canvasser and the story we were just playing, because it's interesting. Rishi Sunak has been accused by some of, in a sense, not quite knowing how to cope with reform and not going directly at them. Well, we saw the Prime Minister go directly for Nigel Farage today, because am I right in saying that broadly, and I know we're talking broadly up to now, the majority of votes that are shifting from Conservative to Reform?
So we do see votes, as you said, shifting in all sorts of different directions, but those 29 Conservative votes are predominantly being lost to Reform UK. We saw them gain 6 points in our latest poll, where the Conservatives dropped 4 points. What I would say, though, is there's still 36% of the public telling us that they might still change their mind on where they vote. And it could be interesting with events throughout the campaign, as we have seen with things happening in previous weeks, with the betting scandal, with the D-Day issue. There's still the potential for movement there. And that 36% who are yet to change their mind still have 6 days to go, although there will be a lot of postal votes that have already gone in, and therefore they won't be able to account that into their decision.
Tell me about issues, because as well as parties, you're looking at issues. What have been the issues in the last, say, 10 days that seem to have actually had traction?
So the key issues that we track on a monthly basis, and have been doing so more frequently throughout the campaign, are the NHS still being the top priority for the public, the economy and the cost of living being the secondary priority for the public, and immigration actually gained a position since our previous month's polling into third place, but the NHS still has a strong lead. What I would say on this is there are differences between how 2019 Conservative voters, for example, feel about different issues. So immigration is top of their list. That's their number one priority. Whereas for Labour voters, the NHS is top of their list. So different groups of people have competing priorities, but we tend to see that consistent top four around healthcare, around the economy and around the environment. So interesting to see whichever new government forms over the next couple of weeks. They're going to be judged on their record of delivery against those priorities.
Really quick final thought, because the hope from the Conservatives always was that once they started the campaign that the polls would narrow, and we haven't really seen that. But historically, with other elections, the last week, the last few days, does there tend to be movement, or more or less a week out? Is that where we usually end up?
Historically, we've tended to see narrowing throughout the life of the campaign. With only 6 days left to go, I think it would be an uphill battle for the Conservatives to narrow too much in the time that we have. In the poll that we have this week, they've recorded record lows on government satisfaction, record lows on prime ministerial ratings, and record lows on their own vote share as well. So to be able to turn that into a positive would be tricky. I would, however, say that Keir Starmer's personal satisfaction ratings are the lowest for any opposition leader going in to potentially be a prime minister. So that could, in fact, cause problems for him if he does indeed become prime minister, as the polls suggest, 6 days today.
Holly Day, great to talk to you. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Let's get out there to hear a bit more about the issues that people are actually considering in these last 6 days in the run-up to the election date itself. The BBC looking at those issues that matter most to you as a voter. One major theme, as you were just hearing there, was the NHS, with many people experiencing long waiting lists. Well, East Kent Hospitals Trust is among the lowest rated in the country for A&E waiting times. Our presenter, Regina, in the Blacksmith Arms pub, which is just down the road from the William Harvey Hospital. Regina, over to you.
Yeah, Matthew. So the William Harvey Hospital is just behind me there, and we were there this morning. Now, as you say, the NHS is consistently seen, as you heard from the pollsters there, as a key issue when it comes to voters at a general election. Now, just to be clear, we're looking at the NHS in England, and that is, of course, because healthcare is a devolved issue in Northern Ireland, Wales and in Scotland, although it is, of course, worth noting that the Westminster government does fund public services in those devolved nations. So there is a relevance in that sense as well. Now, as you mentioned there, waiting times have been a challenge and an issue that have come up through the campaign so far. And the reason we picked East Kent Hospitals Trust is because some of the challenges seem to reflect the national picture here. And through the course of the morning here, we've spoken to people who've shared stories about their challenges when they go to A&E, when they turn up to hospital and they want to get seen. So first of all, let's look at some of the data and the stats. Jim Reid, our health reporter, is here with me. So Jim, first of all, what's the national picture in terms of people who want to get seen in an accident and emergency room? How long are they having to wait?
So 4 hours is the key number you're looking for. That's the target for someone who turns up at A&E to be dealt with. So either to be treated and then go home, or to be admitted to a ward if they want to. The target for the NHS is 95% of patients should be treated or dealt with in that way. At the moment in May, it was 74%, so quite a long way below that target. The local hospital around here and its neighbouring hospital as part of the trust is 76%. So roughly that sort of national average. But then, Regini, there's a second measure which is in a way more important, I think. So this is people who are sick enough that if they go into A&E, they then need to be admitted into the hospital for more tests, for more intense treatment. Now, if you look at what happened in May in this hospital around the corner here, about 5,200 patients were in that situation. About a third of those then had to wait 4 hours after that decision to admit them. And crucially, 23%, so almost a quarter, had to wait more than 12 hours. And it's those very long waits in A&E, often on a chair or in a corridor, on a bed in a corridor, which doctors say are particularly concerning.
OK, Jim, we'll be back with Jim in a second, but Jim touched on there the challenges of people who are waiting to be admitted onto a ward, and they're sometimes stuck in A&E for hours on end. Well, I'm going to go meet Simon, who's been patiently waiting for me over here. Now, Simon, welcome to BBC News.
Hi.
Tell us about your experience waiting in A&E. Last October it was, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I went into A&E. It took over 8 hours for me to actually be seen by a doctor. Once I was seen, I was advised that I needed to be admitted. I then spent in excess of 2 days on a trolley in public corridors with the public walking backwards and forwards past me. Because I hadn't officially been admitted during that time, I was not receiving any food or drink or anything before I ended up actually getting on a ward.
How did it feel when you were waiting on a trolley, effectively in a corridor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Quite degrading, to be honest. You don't feel obviously well at the best of times when you're obviously in the hospital. That's the whole purpose. So to actually be sat there with people walking past who just stare at you, it's quite disconcerting.
All the while, I assume you were in pain as well.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
And when you look back at that experience, and then you had to be admitted again, what's your feeling about how the health service is functioning at the moment?
Personally, I think one of the biggest issues is lack of communication. You're left there, you're not told what's happening. When you do ask the questions, you get basically palmed off, and then you're left to just sit and wonder what is actually going on. It just seems that they're understaffed. They don't have enough people to actually do the job and provide the service that they're there for.
There's an election coming up, as we well know. Which party are you going to vote for, and which party do you think offers the best prospect for the health service?
I'm in two minds of parties, to be honest. It's somewhere between Labour and Reform. My personal view is that I think any party that gets in is going to struggle to deal with the NHS in its current form. It's too far gone at the moment to just be able to walk in and fix it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
And you say Labour and Reform. This is, of course, a Conservative-held seat, a comfortable majority for the Conservatives at the moment. Have you voted Conservative in the past?
Yes, I have. And based on what has happened over recent years, I shan't be voting again.
And what is it about Labour or Reform that you think would be better in terms of handling the health service? I don't know if you've looked in detail at their policies on that.
The problem I have with any of these policies is, unfortunately, whichever government gets in, or whichever party gets into government, the normal response is we need to fix the problems that the previous government caused. So whether anything's going to change in the short term or not is anybody's guess.
Let me ask you this, because we're going to be talking about this later in the afternoon as we look at other aspects of the health service. We're talking about A&E and your experience, but what about getting to see a GP? How easy is that?
Forget it. Doesn't happen. I cannot remember the last time I had a face-to-face appointment with a GP. You call up at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is when they say for you to call, and you end up 25th in the queue. Or if you try to do the e-consult online, you end up basically being told that they've run out of spaces.
OK, Simon, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and I'm pleased to say that you're saying that you are recovering from the condition that you were admitted to. I'm just going to hop back to Jim Reid again, who's at the table still. Change sides. So, Jim, you were listening to Simon's story. It's pretty difficult to listen to. You've got a response from the hospital, first of all, haven't you?
I do, and I do think it's worth pointing out that the kind of issues which Simon was talking about there are well reflected across England at the moment. We're here in Ashford in Kent, but many other hospitals are facing the same pressures. We did ask the hospital for a response. They said, well, they're very sorry that patients are waiting longer than they would like, but they are making progress, they say, in reducing the amount of time that patients are waiting, both in A&E and for planned care. They also say they have increased their capacity for things like operations and for outpatient clinics, and are changing the way they work to speed these patients through the hospital, which is often the problem.
Now, Jim, earlier in the programme or through our coverage, I was speaking to someone from the Royal College of Emergency Surgeons or emergency doctors, the coalface really, in an emergency room at A&E. And the doctor I spoke to said that he felt that none of the party manifestos had enough in them when it came to addressing some of the challenges that Simon and other people that we've spoken to feel. What would you make of that?
I think when you look through the manifestos, there is not very specific points really made about A&E care, which I think is the criticism the doctor was making earlier on. There are some quite detailed points about other aspects of care, and of course, because the NHS is so joined up, one thing often affects the other. So if you look at what the Conservatives are saying, they're saying they would add 92,000 more nurses, 28,000 more doctors. They also say they would set up 50 new community diagnostic centres. Labour say that they are going to return these waiting times to target. They also talk about adding 2 million more appointments a year through adding evening and weekend appointments. And the Lib Dems, their big push here is to speed up or add more capacity for social care and to introduce the same sort of system we have in Scotland, which is free personal care for people through taxation rather than people paying it themselves.
OK, thank you very much, Jim Reid. Well, I'm now joined down the line by Siva Under Siva from the King's Fund, which is an organisation, independent organisation, which looks at the NHS. Welcome to BBC News, Siva. I'd like to ask you, first of all, you've heard what Simon had to say about his personal challenges, and Jim Reid, my colleague there, saying this is sort of reflective of the wider challenges that many hospitals across England are facing when it comes to emergency admissions. What is your analysis of the challenge and how can it be fixed?
Thank you, and I'm sorry to hear about what Simon went through, and I think he's absolutely right. That illustrates from the wider problems the NHS is facing, and it's facing a lot of problems. But if I was to select three that I think are the most significant, I would say it's staffing, it's money, and it's waiting times. And if you look at staffing, we have a junior doctor strike on at the moment. We've got very low morale, and we've still got staff shortages up and down the country. If you look at money, we've got hospitals, including hospitals like East Kent, that are worried about overspending their budgets, and so are actually contemplating taking out staff in some cases. And then on waiting times, they were bad before COVID, but they've certainly gotten worse. And one of the really striking things is you've been focusing on A&E quite rightly, but whether you look at A&E, ambulance waiting times, or waiting times for planned hospital care, there's really poor performance across the board. So it's a really struggling NHS that the next government will inherit.
And Siva, we've spoken to a number of other experts and doctors who are all talking about the need for more investment into the NHS in England. But the challenge is, where's that money going to come from?
Yes, absolutely. And And I think both parties, as Jim pointed out, were quite thin on the detail of what their plans are in the manifestos. What I would say is, certainly when you look at their plans, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have promised more resources for the NHS. They've promised to support the long-term workforce plan to recruit more doctors and nurses and other clinical professionals. They've supported the long-term plan to build up to 40 new hospitals. So part of the answer is more capacity and resources for the NHS. But I think part of the answer absolutely has to be, however much money you give the service using that money wisely. And there are some good examples of how hospitals are using their resources and sharing their resources more collaboratively. And technology, without wanting to overstate its impact, I've seen examples where hospitals are embracing technology to improve patient safety and also reduce waiting time. So I think we have to be realistic, but there is some hope, there is some optimism of what might be achievable.
And I'd like to pick up on something that Simon felt was a real gripe for him, and he said it was communication. The fact that he was lying on a trolley for a couple of days and he didn't really know what was going on. It's not something that's talked about that often when we look at some of the challenges and we talk about the big picture stuff. But what's your take on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and Simon's absolutely right to highlight it. And some of the hospitals that I've worked with that most impressed me are hospitals that are trying to become world-class communicators in two ways. Whether it's giving you better information and choice of when your appointment might happen. So if you've got a planned appointment, you can plan around it rather than just getting a letter out of the blue. And secondly, as Simon's waiting there, better communicators in the moment. So treating people with privacy and dignity and respect and explaining this is what's happening and why. This is why you might be waiting a little bit longer because that piece of equipment isn't ready or is already being used. And this is what's going to happen next. A lot of what causes us anxiety is not knowing what happens next. And some parts of the NHS, but not enough just yet, are getting better at becoming world-class communicators.
OK, thank you so much, Siva Andersiva from the King's Fund, for sharing your thoughts and analysis on some of the challenges and some of the possible solutions. Well, Matthew, I'll also later in the day be at a GP surgery speaking to a GP about some of the challenges general practitioners are facing at the moment. And just a reminder that in the Ashford constituency, you can go to the BBC website and see all the candidates who are standing in the election here, and indeed in any of the seats that you want to watch.
Regini, thanks once again. And as Regini saying, head to the BBC website because issue by issue we break it down and go through some of the detail and hear from our correspondents and our teams. Let's take a different look, though, at the same election. What do children think about the upcoming election? Well, the BBC's Newsround programme has been speaking to kids right across the UK about what matters most to them. Have a listen.
We're in Glasgow in Scotland.
So we are in Holywood in Belfast, the capital city of Northern Ireland.
Welcome to Wales. Yes, welcome to Llandudno.
So for the last stop of the Newsround election roadshow, we're in England, specifically here in Dudley, in the West Midlands.
And now, what do you think the Prime Minister should tackle? What should be the first big thing that they do when they become the Prime Minister?
I feel like that they should get the NHS back on their feet so they can help with future illnesses.
The biggest issues the government should tackle is school funding to renew schools and give schools better and fun activities to do each day.
Very nice. You had a different issue in mind?
I think one of the most important things we should focus on would be cleaning all of our rivers.
And what do you think?
I agree with Matilda about the pollution, as there's an article that says we have a right to a clean environment, and I don't think we have this.
And there's a huge issue at the moment for lots of people who are struggling. Tell us what you think should happen.
To help lower energy bills and gas bills because they're getting higher and higher.
So help to bring down those bills which have been impacting millions of people. What should the government be doing? Who should they be listening to?
I think they should be listening to children's voices more and even give them a seat in the Parliament.
We'd like the government to tackle climate change because we're the future of this country and we don't want anyone pumping waste into the oceans.
I would advise the new Prime Minister to focus on the NHS because they work so hard to save so many people's lives and they work really long hours.
Well, there you go, just a flavour of it. You saw him there in that report. Ricky Villetto has been buzzing around the UK. He's here in the studio with me. Broadly, first of all, the age group that you generally have been talking to as you go around the country?
Mainly primary school, so kids between the ages of 6 and 12 years old. Obviously, they can't vote, but I think there's a huge misconception that kids and children are not interested in politics. You know, so many of the kids that we spoke to over the last few days really are engaged in it, and loads of schools take part in democracy lessons, more so than ever before, certainly more than when I was growing up. So they're learning about manifestos, you know, how to represent themselves, what to do if they were a prime minister or in charge of their school, so many things.
And there was no shortage there, as we were listening, in terms of what issues actually interest them.
Yes, so one of the big ones that we found this year is health. You know, lots of children who've either found themselves ending up in A&E because they've broken their arm or something, having 3 or 4 hour waits. A lot of children that we were speaking to said that health was their key concern. The education as well, when it comes to how children can have better schools and make sure that everything around their education is being looked after properly. But the environment is a key one as well for kids, and it always has been for young people, but even more so now. Lots of children concerned about climate change and mental health too. And we haven't heard an awful lot about some of those issues during the campaign because politicians don't always speak to children, do they? So mental health is another one that's cropped up quite a lot.
How open were they when you were talking to them broadly in terms of not just issues they're interested in, but things that perhaps worry them?
Well, some of the younger kids are not as engaged or as interested in the election. You know, they're seeing it, of course, because parents at home are watching it and teachers are talking about it, but not everyone is going to be as enthused about it as some of the Year 6 or Year 5 kids. I wouldn't say that they're all worried about it. I think they're looking forward to seeing what happens. So many of them are taking part in mock elections as well inside their classrooms too. I was speaking to a couple of kids though about politicians' behaviour. That was a really interesting one, and a lot of kids were talking about the conduct of politicians, how they've been behaving, and we've seen, you know, over the last couple of years that has been cropping up, hasn't it?
That's interesting. So even at that age, they're clocking all of that.
Yeah. So they've been talking about that at school, talking about it to me as well. And it's really key, I think, that we let them have a say, and Newsround's a great platform for them to do that, but they want to have more of a say themselves, have a seat in Parliament, being able to actually help those adults make decisions that impact their lives.
Just a final thought, because as we were waiting to come to this item, when we were hearing about the NHS, you were talking to me, results day, you're going to be there in Downing Street again, trying to sort of connect, explain what all of this means.
Yeah, of course. They know that famous black door, number 10 Downing Street. They want to see Newsround there to give them the results, but also we have a special programme on Monday where we will be involving Mark Clattenburg, who is the main referee for BBC Gladiators, huge show that kids love, speaking to him about, you know, how to debate properly, how to debate respectfully as well, with someone who maybe doesn't have the same opinion as you. And we're also looking at what do all the words mean, you know, what is an MP, what does that mean, all of these things we'll be looking at Newsround. So yeah, if you're a teacher or a parent or a kid yourself, you know, get involved and watch.
Absolutely fascinating. Ricky, thank you very much for coming in, take me through all of that. Well, let's continue with another aspect of the campaign, because here on BBC News we've been spending each day scrutinising the campaign promises, how they could affect different parts of the country. We're also taking time to report on the particular issues in different parts of the UK and look at how they could affect the outcome of the election in 6 days' time. So let's concentrate on that for the next few minutes. In Stoke is Anna Whitaker, Staffordshire political reporter, and in Leicester, James Pearson, who's the Herefordshire political reporter. James, in terms of you, first of all, what are the big issues at play where you are?
It's what you'd probably call a rural constituency. Just 4% of people here work in a city, and it's got beautiful towns and market towns and villages like where I am in Leicester with its timbered buildings instead. Traditionally, in general elections, this is a safe Tory seat. They had a majority of almost 25,000 here in 2019. This time round, though, it's a very hard-fought contest, and two clear issues are coming up on the doorstep at the moment. The NHS, in particular the state of dentistry, and the environment, in particular rivers. On the NHS, in the whole of Herefordshire in recent years, there's been a real lack, a complete shortage of NHS dental places, and that's left families with a dilemma: either travel out of county for hours to get NHS treatment, or pay private, or go without. And the state of children's teeth in Herefordshire has been a concern because of that. Now, there are efforts to turn this around. There are new dental practices opening this year. But if you speak to local dentists, they will tell you that the NHS needs to pay them more for the treatment they already do. And if we switch to the environment, another big issue here is the state of rivers, a big talking point in this election. Last year, the River Wye, its health was downgraded because of a decline in species like salmon, which once were really common. The issue isn't just sewage as pollution, it's agricultural pollution too, manure rolling off fields into the river. And in particular, that's been linked to a big increase in poultry farming in the area. At any one time, there are 23 million chickens being reared in the Wye Valley, and that's been linked to the pollution in rivers. Now, the government says it is doing something about it. There's £35 million of investment going in, but campaigners say that's still not enough. And for political parties wanting to deal with voters' concerns about this, they also have to be careful not to demonise farmers. There's a strong farming community here, and they feel they're being demonised at a time when, with the cost of living, their livelihoods are under pressure. But if you speak to voters on the doorstep, they have one very simple litmus test when it comes to rivers. They want to know if they're safe to go and swim in again, as they would have done for many generations.
James, thanks very much. Let's go back to Anna. Give me a snapshot of the scene where you are.
Yes, hi. So I'm outside Middleport Pottery in Stoke-on-Trent. Now, Stoke is famous for its history in the ceramics industry, but people here feel let down. They feel that levelling up hasn't worked for them. Back in 2019, voters in their droves took a chance on Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, and for the first time in history, all 3 seats here turned blue. So Labour have really been hammering it hard in Stoke-on-Trent this time around, trying to win those 3 seats back here in Stoke-on-Trent, a former red wall area for decades and generations. The big issues here, though, this election, are many really reflected in the national picture. It's the NHS, it's the cost of living, and it's immigration as well. Now, Stoke-on-Trent was one of the places which voted most heavily for Brexit back during that vote in 2016. And really, we're looking to see whether this is going to come through again with the Reform vote here in Stoke. Reform UK have put up candidates in every area, and that could be a bit of a worry for the Tories here too. We've had big profile visits as well from politicians. We've had Keir Starmer, who visited yesterday. He visited a pottery in Stoke-on-Trent, and Rishi Sunak as well visited Stoke-on-Trent in the first full week of campaigning. So clearly Stoke-on-Trent will be a big battleground going forward.
Anna Whittaker, thanks very much to you, and thanks to James Pearson a little earlier. Thanks to both of you. Now to Scotland, because the SNP Campaign Bus has taken to the road for the first time. Party leader and Scottish First Minister John Swinney stepped off the vehicle for a campaign event in Edinburgh. He says it will carry the SNP's message to all parts of the country, and that his key message is that only the SNP can be trusted to stand up for Scotland in Westminster. Well, our correspondent Katrina Renton was waiting for the bus to make its first stop and sent us this update.
Will you join us on a very windy Carlton Hill here in central Edinburgh, where the SNP have just launched their brand new campaign bus, which they're going to crisscross the country in over the last 6 days of the campaign, taking their message out to voters. And we spoke to the First Minister a few minutes ago.
The voters in Scotland are concerned about austerity, about Brexit and the cost of living and all the damage that's doing to their lives in Scotland. And our answer to that is to make sure decisions are made in Scotland for Scotland. Now, we know that the Labour Party are winning this election in England. In Scotland, however, there's a real contest, and people in Scotland, if they want to make sure that there's strong voices to protect us against austerity and to ensure that we can make progress on Scotland's constitutional journey, people have got to vote for the SNP.
So as you heard there, the First Minister's message to voters is that they want people to vote for the SNP. They believe that the Labour Party will win the general election, so they believe that the SNP is the party to make a difference in Scotland. Independence, of course, is front and centre of the SNP's campaign. They say that an independent Scotland will have the powers to tackle austerity, the cost of living and the effects of Brexit, which they say have been damaging. Now, there's another issue come to light here in Scotland, and that's about postal votes. Our schools have just broken up for the school holidays, and many people try to get away before the English schools break up so that they can get cheaper deals. So the consequence of that is that many people will be away on holiday on the 4th of July, and if they've not received their postal vote before they go, they're going to not have the opportunity to vote. And there are calls for a reform of that system in light of what has happened here in future elections. And the bus is going to make its way down towards the borders.
That's our correspondent Katrina Renton staying with Scotland. And Edinburgh City Council says it's taking urgent steps to make sure people can cast their vote in next week's general election amid concerns about delayed postal ballots. A facility is open at the city chambers from today to allow residents to request a new voting pack. Well, you can watch non-stop coverage of the election campaign now until the results are called and beyond on the BBC iPlayer. Just look for Election 2024 Live. Now let's return to our main story, that TV debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that really stumbling performance from Joe Biden, and the aftermath afterwards. But of course, that New York Times headline I was describing a little earlier on the programme, talking about a stumbling performance and a party now in panic. Let me tell you, the chair of the Democratic Party, Jamie Harrison, has been talking to the BBC World Service's NewsHour programme in the last little while, telling his fellow party members to, and I'll quote you what he said, "Stop the hand-wringing, start rolling up your sleeves and do the work. Joe Biden does not run away from a fight, never has, never will." And of course, those comments trying to actually bolster the morale of so many party workers, talk of people with their head in their hands as they were watching the debate last night. And of course, behind the scenes, so many comments about whether we've reached the moment where someone within the Democratic Party says to Joe Biden, well, it's time to think again. Well, no sign of that coming from the chair of the Democratic Party talking to BBC News a little earlier. More on that here in the next little while. Now, after the arrival of festival goers over the past few days, Glastonbury kicks off properly later today with 200,000 people expected at Worthy Farm this weekend. Soon the focus will be on the music itself, but in the meantime, our entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson has been taking a look at a slightly unconventional warm-up to the festival.
This is not a rave-up, it's a warm-up. Every year, more and more people are running at Glastonbury. 450 festival goers had signed up for a 5K organised by Ravers to Runners.
We started Ravers to Runners a few years back as being a previous raver, and then kind of going a bit too far, got a bit poorly. Found running, changed my life, and I still think that partying is really important, but also so is looking after yourself.
We told everyone it's 5K, but it actually might be more like 7. But we're going to guess.
Sneaky. I've been working on my Glastonbury running puns. The best one I've come up with so far, from Dua Lipa to Dua Lapa.
Oh. Well, that went down better than I was expecting.
How much fun is this going to be?
Oh, I'm unsure at the moment.
Then we spotted that one participant...
We're getting ready for the run now. So it's Marsh Lane Harriers. That's our running club, my brother's running club. So
was the former English international footballer...
I'm just a runner, not a raver.
Jamie Carragher.
My wife, yeah.
Do you often come to Glastonbury?
Been here the last 5 years, yeah.
Really? I didn't know you were such a veteran.
Yeah, oh, I am, yeah.
So who are you wanting to see this year?
Who are we seeing? We're seeing Sonic tonight. Definitely want to see James. Dua Lipa, Coldplay, Jamie Webster, the Zootons and the Farm.
Tonight's where you should all wear a leopard print on Sunday.
Yes.
Now, nasty clash though, because England, 5 o'clock, Shania Twain finishes at 5 o'clock.
That's not a big decision for her, it'll be Shania Twain. Right, I'm off!
And some very familiar landmarks were on their route.
Hi, who's around?
At the very same time, Joe Wicks was hosting a Glastonbury workout. And congratulations were in order.
Sorry.
Little baby boy came about 9 days ago. We called him Dusty.
Oh, that's appropriate for this year's Glastonbury.
Yeah, very dusty fields. But yeah, no, it's exciting. I love being a dad. So I've got Indy, Marley, Lenny and Dusty. I feel like that's a complete set now. I'm so chuffed.
How's it been for you?
Amazing!
Well dressed as a unicorn.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, what good excuse to be a unicorn? Let's go, Spiderland!
Are you hot yet?
Yeah.
Are you very hot?
Very hot.
Perfect!
I think you may have the least appropriate outfit of anyone here. What were you thinking?
Even more to Joe Wicks, my lordy lord.
And things could get even bigger.
My dream is to come back and do the Pyramid Stage one year. They've never done a workout there, right? So imagine me on stage, banging tunes, and like 10, 20, 30,000 people doing a workout. That'd be life-changing.
So even if I could, would it go back where we started?
Someone who's playing the Pyramid Stage today is the Mercury-nominated singer Olivia Dean.
I feel quite emotional even just sort of standing here. Like I've wanted to play on this stage for my whole life. Like my whole life.
Why does it mean so much to you?
Because it's just like the best festival in the world, and also like I think it's just the stage that every musician dreams of playing.
It's ridiculous. You are playing there tomorrow.
I know, and they won't let me in.
We can't even walk to the front
I know.
at the moment.
Look at us, chumps. Absolute chumps.
We've been doing a lot on exercise today. How do you warm up for when you're playing a show like this?
So I like to listen to some classical music and have some hot water with honey.
What about the vocals?
Oh yeah, warm up the vocals, obviously. Yeah, la 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 la, all that stuff.
La la la.
The classic.
And there was just time to pop over to Glastonbury Latino for a rather more rhythmical form of exercise.
Describe how you feel.
Unbelievable, brilliant vibes, just the best way to start the festival.
Every day here, thousands of people are going to salsa classes.
Oh my God, it's amazing, it's so fun. It's already so hot and I'm only just started, it's great.
It really gets your endorphins going, which are your happy hormones, makes you feel good in your body and your mind. It doesn't feel like exercise. It's not like going to the gym. People burn calories, tone up all their muscles, and they don't even realize they're doing it.
And with the music starting on the main stages today, a weekend of dancing lies ahead. Colin Patterson, BBC News.
Fantastic stuff. We'll be live in Glastonbury a little later here in the afternoon. Let's check weather details. Here's Ben Rich.
Hello. Today got off to a pretty soggy start in the north of the UK. Some heavy rain first thing in northern Scotland, but not much in the way of rain further south. And through the weekend, it's actually looking dry for many. Not quite for all. There will be some spells of sunshine. The earlier satellite picture shows this curl of cloud, which brought some wet and quite blustery weather in northern Scotland through the morning. This afternoon, the heaviest rain pulling away across the Northern Isles. It does stay quite windy in the north, where we will see some showers. Further south, lighter winds, still quite breezy, but not as many showers. Some spells of sunshine. We have, however, lost the real warmth of the last few days. Temperatures at 5 o'clock, around 22 degrees there in London. And then through this evening and tonight, where we see clear skies, it will turn really quite chilly, but it won't be clear everywhere because this zone of cloud and patchy rain does work its way in from the west, holding temperatures up, say, across parts of Wales, northwest England, 12 degrees there for Liverpool as we start Saturday morning. So for tomorrow, this frontal system pushing in from the west, but this is really a very weak affair. Not much energy about this weather system. So just a zone of cloud, some patchy rain, particularly across parts of Wales, northern England. That won't move very far really through the day. To the north of that, Northern Ireland, southern and central Scotland, largely dry with some sunshine. Northern Scotland seeing cloud and some showers. And then towards the south and the southeast of England, some spells of sunshine and actually a shot of warmer air pushing up from the south. So highs of around 25 degrees there in the capital. Now, as we head into the second half of the weekend, this ridge of high pressure tries to build from the Atlantic. Around the top of that high, though, we will see a fair amount of cloud filtering its way in. Maybe some showers first thing across southern England, then moving across the Channel Islands. Otherwise, largely dry, but with a lot of cloud and just 1 or 2 showers. And temperatures, no great shakes really. 14 degrees in Stornoway, 21 the high in London. Now, into next week, we will see a run of westerly winds and frontal systems pushing in from the Atlantic. But this ridge of high pressure to the south will never be too far away, and I suspect that means that southern parts of the UK won't see an awful lot of rain, whereas further north and west we will see rain at times, and it's not going to be particularly warm.